You're listening to a CNA podcast.
What is the law and what is the crime that I committed? Show to me now the legal basis for my being here.
That's former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte speaking in an Instagram story posted by his daughter soon after he was arrested in Manila on Tuesday. He was taken into custody at the request of the International Criminal Court.
Sabihin ko, you're the person who arrested me. May I know the reason why?
Within the same day, Mr. Duterte was on a plane to The Hague, where the ICC is located. So how did we get here? And what's next for Mr. Duterte? CNA's Buena Bernal is here with some answers. Hi, Buena.
Hi, Teresa. Happy to be speaking with you again.
Former President Duterte probably didn't expect his trip to Hong Kong to end the way it did. He was arrested at the airport after he arrived back in Manila. First off, what was your reaction when you heard?
Well, in the case of the arrest, there have already been indications, even from the weekend prior, that this was going to happen. Specifically, a report from local news site Rappler's head of investigative desk, Chai Hofilenya. And although that article was a bit tentative, it had a question mark at the end of the headline that an arrest warrant was issued, and it did quote anonymous informed sources. I do know Ms. Hofilenya personally, and I do know that she wouldn't stake her byline for something she is not almost assured of. And that's what the vibrant local press was working on when they say there were rumors that an arrest warrant was issued. But because there were indications of that, the local press had to ask the International Criminal Court itself. And actually, up until the arrest, the ICC was insisting on the confidentiality of the probe. And that's understandable because you wouldn't want the subject of the arrest warrant to be able to preempt and evade the arrest. And now that, we know that the warrant was issued, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan is in fact disclosing to the public that last month, February, their camp applied for an ex parte request for the arrest warrant, meaning that application was under seal. And that's precisely because of the sensitivity of this case, and also based on that warrant itself, the fact that the subject of the arrest warrant had or could wield significant influence and could use resources to kind of preempt what's about to happen. The way that breaking news happens in the Philippines, where watershed moments are almost expected as part of the development of news, you just take it as it comes. So if the question is, what was my personal reaction to it? I just took it as it came, followed the developments, spoke to as many stakeholders as we can. But upon hearing that breaking news, it was almost impossible not to be brought back to the scenes of the drug war.
Now, reports say Interpol's Manila office, they received an arrest warrant in the early morning on Tuesday. Just a few hours later, police took Mr. Duterte into custody. Buena, he's been a marked man for some time now. Why is the International Criminal Court after him?
It started with a complaint filed back in April 2017 by a lawyer named Jude Sabio. Now, of course, after that, there have been supplemental complaints filed. But in that original complaint, Mr. Sabio was talking about the Davao Death Squad, meaning these are the killings that occurred even during the mayoralty of former President Rodrigo Duterte, because he was longtime chief executive of the southern Philippine city of Davao, where these drug-related killings actually started happening. So they started happening even before he became president. And in the original complaint, that was already cited there. But what was specifically cited there is the similarities of the killings in Davao to the killings that were happening on a nationwide scale when he became president. It was a 77-page filing. It was not, in fact, covered heavily by Philippine media. In fact, the way the filing was communicated to Philippine media was simply through a press release The court warrant from the International Criminal Court pretrial chamber said that there were common features in these killings, and the common features included the method of the killing. But what struck me there the most is that the warrant said there was a common feature in terms of the profile of the victims. And during the war, a lot of these killings happened in Metro Manila's slums. So it did feel like the anti-drug campaign was targeting the country's poor.
Mr. Duterte, he's always been defiant when it came to his so-called war on drugs. The year that he won his presidency, he said, and I quote, "If you know of any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself, as getting their parents to do it would be too painful." That was in 2016. And he's even said that so many bodies would be dumped in Manila Bay that fish would grow fat from feeding on them. I mean, how has he defended his words and his actions up until this point?
You hear President Duterte famously saying in Hong Kong during a trip supposedly campaigning for the senatorial state, him and his daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, are supporting that any actions he did was for love of country. And for you to understand this line, you need to understand Duterte, the man, the leader, the lawyer, before becoming Duterte the president. He was a criminal prosecutor before becoming elected official. And the Philippine justice system is hounded with woes. Trials are notoriously slow. Court dockets are clogged. Those with resources are at a disproportionate advantage. All this to say that the wheels of justice in the Philippines turn ever so slowly. That was the reality that Mr. Duterte was faced with as a criminal prosecutor. When he became an elected leader, the chief executive of the southern Philippine city of Davao, he was known as a crime-busting mayor, supposedly because he went after criminals in the name of protecting the victims. Mr. Duterte during his presidency was loved by state forces, and that includes both military and police. He gave them a pay hike. He listened to their pleas that many presidents have long ignored. This is something I hear from military generals. In other words, the background of Mr. Duterte as being face-to-face with victims of crimes shaped the leader that he would later become. When he was catapulted to the presidency on a campaign promise of ending drugs and criminality in 3 to 6 months, he took that strategy that he was using in Davao City on a nationwide scale.
Critics of Mr. Duterte, they've cheered his arrest, unsurprisingly. They say, look, justice is finally catching up with him. What other reaction has there been, Buena?
On the day of President Duterte's arrest, the mobilizations from rights groups were immediate. We went to one candlelighting event where they were, in fact, calling for Mr. Duterte to be flown right away. A few hours later, we had to travel to Villamor Air Base, where he was being held, and there was a huge swell of Duterte supporters chanting his name. There is a level of loyalty that President Duterte commands from his base of supporters. The former presidential chief legal counsel, Salvador Panelo, was saying the arrest is illegal because he was deprived of legal representation at the airport when one of his lawyers was barred from seeing him. Mr. Panelo is saying that a hard copy of the arrest warrant was not being shown. He was saying that the arrest warrant comes from a spurious source, that being the International Criminal Court, arguing that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over the Philippines because the Philippines withdrew from the Rome Statute in 2018, and that withdrawal per rules took effect a year later in March 2019. The argument coming from the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan, before him ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda, is that while the Philippines has withdrawn from the ICC, the crimes that were committed prior to the withdrawal is still covered by the court. And the Philippines Supreme Court said as much, that the Philippines has an obligation to cooperate with the probe insofar as the crimes that were committed prior to the withdrawal of the Philippines from the Rome Statute. His daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, who we were able to listen to at one of the gates of Villamor Air Base, said that the Philippines surrendered to foreign powers, that the Philippines betrayed its sovereignty, that the Philippines abandoned its citizen, that being her father. A group of surviving relatives of drug war victims argue that sovereignty should not be a shield for accountability. Mr. Duterte is saying that he is willing to face the courts, but he would like to face a domestic court. There is a 2009 law in the Philippines that pertains to violations of international humanitarian law and crimes against humanity. And this could have been very well used to file a case against Mr. Duterte. So the short form of it is the IHL Act, International Humanitarian Law Act. In fact, this IHL Act was used by natives of Myanmar to file a case against the Myanmar junta's generals in the Philippines. The lawyer of this case, Romel Bagares, says that in fact the ICC probe would not have been initiated had there been a case against Mr. Duterte under this law. IHL expert and professor at the Ateneo de Manila School of Law, Ivcar Cruz Ferrer, also argues that there is a principle of complementarity under the ICC, that it would respect domestic adjudication mechanisms. In 2021, the Philippine government asked the ICC pretrial chamber to defer to the local courts. But in 2023, the pretrial chamber found merit in the argument of ICC prosecutor Karim Khan that the investigation at the ICC does not mirror any investigation on the ground. Echoing the lawyers of the surviving kin of the drug war victims, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. himself argues that the Philippines has a legal obligation as a member country to Interpol to cooperate with that body. So that's the official line from the Philippine government. But I spoke with author and international humanitarian law expert Ivcar Cruz Ferrer, who argues that cooperating with the Interpol is actually a matter of state discretion. So the Philippines is not a party to the Rome Statute that created the ICC, but it is a member country of Interpol. But there is actually nothing that compels the Philippines or any country at that to cooperate with Interpol. And in fact, Interpol, she said, relies heavily on the willingness of the state to exchange police information with them for criminal analysis and relies on the willingness of states in the search of fugitives and suspects. The Philippines has been a member of Interpol since 1952, and it is important to cooperate with the Interpol because it is a body that's trying to combat cross-border crimes like human trafficking and terrorism. In other words, the Marcos administration, she says, had a choice, and ultimately the Marcos administration chose to hand over Mr. Duterte to the ICC.
The arrest the arrest that we did today was in compliance with our commitments to Interpol. It just so happened that that came from ICC. But it's not because it came from ICC, it's because it came from Interpol.
The former leader, he was incredibly popular at home, and he's managed to maintain that support among many people in the Philippines and beyond as well. Buena, how influential is Mr. Duterte in politics today?
There were pre-election surveys that see him among the top of senatorial choices had he filed a candidacy. His daughter is the sitting vice president and is seen as a viable choice for the 2028 presidency. In fact, there are rights groups who welcomed the probes at the Philippine House of Representatives against Ms. Duterte and the alleged misuse of funds under offices she led, including previously as education minister and confidential funds. They welcomed the political fallout between the Philippines' two biggest political families, the Marcoses and the Dutertes, because for rights activists, although this is rivalry between the Philippines' ruling elite, it meant that a Duterte would not return to office as president. So rights groups are saying they found unlikely allies. But if that crowd outside the airbase is any indication, Mr. Duterte is still loved by many. There is an entire wing of the Philippines ruling elite as well that is allied with the Dutertes, in as much as there are those majority allied with the Marcoses right now. And this shows you the kind of political turncoatism that exists in the Philippines.
Mr. Duterte's arrest, it comes as the Philippines gears up for midterm elections. Those are set for May the 12th, and Mr. Duterte was hoping to become the mayor of Davao again. Now, though, what sort of fallout could there be for his family's political ambitions? And what does his arrest tell us about the domestic politics at play?
If there's anything that you learn from the 6 years of Mr. Duterte as president, it is that he is surrounded by a team with good political acumen. You cannot undermine how well they play politics just in terms of being able to evade widespread international criticism of the drug war, for example, or just ending up as president with over 70% approval ratings by the end of his term, the highest end-of-term approval rating for any Philippine president in 22 years. Despite widespread international criticism, that is how Mr. Duterte was perceived at the end of his term. All this thanks to a team. So if anything, all eyes are on this case, but you can also see that team using those eyeballs to repeat rhetoric, to reinforce the perception that this is a man who loves the country and that those he supports this coming May 2025 elections are people like him. And while he's saying publicly that he takes responsibility for what has happened and that he will be facing this trial in behalf of Philippine state forces, you actually see a lot of political wrangling on the ground, with his lawyers filing multiple petitions before the Philippine Supreme Court to have him return to the Philippines, to declare the arrest as illegal, to question the jurisdiction of the ICC. But for all the allegations that local politics is at play, Mr. Marcos insists that a lot of these allegations came before his presidency. And this is the same line that he insists on in terms of the ongoing impeachment case against Vice President Duterte, that he is hands off with any incoming trial at the Philippine Senate, that we are overplaying his power, overplaying his capabilities when we see him as an invisible hand behind this incoming trial. But independent political observers would say that while the case started before Mr. Marcos, the arrest would not have happened without his say-so.
This case started in 2017 when we were still members of the ICC, and it was during the time of former President Duterte. So I don't see how that can be political persecution on my part, because it was initiated before I even came into the picture.
And Buena, his daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, she said her father was forcibly taken. She's worried about his health right now. He's 79 years old. So before we go, can you tell us what is next for him?
Experts are saying that a trial at the ICC could average 8 to 10 years. But right now, he is facing pre-trial hearing that's called confirmation of charges, that's due after the arrest or after taking into custody person who is the subject of an ICC arrest warrant. In that warrant, the ICC pretrial chamber said that there is reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Duterte had individual responsibility as a co-perpetrator of the nationwide systemic killings that occurred. It's a long way to go for justice and accountability if we're going by the average trial years at the ICC or even the success rate of that court in terms of convicting those it is trying. And for all the allegations that the drug war did not respect the due process rights of the suspected drug users and drug dealers, the Commission on Human Rights, an independent constitutional body in the Philippines that Mr. Duterte repeatedly threatened to defund during his presidency, called for authorities to respect the due process rights of Mr. Duterte. This is a case like no other. And Mr. Raul Pangalangan, former judge at the International Criminal Court, says as much.
In my years in the court, in all the cases I've handled, I have not encountered a similar situation. But I don't think it is for any domestic court to order the the ICC to release a prisoner already within the jurisdiction of the court.
Well, in true Duterte fashion, it's clear, Buena, he is not going down without a fight. Thank you so much for watching this developing story for us. Already
overwhelmed with gratitude just for the privilege of bearing witness.
Catch up on all of Buena's reports from the Philippines on YouTube and also on CNA.Asia. And there are also TV episodes of CNA Correspondent every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. I'm Teresa Tang. The team behind this episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, and Craig Dale. A new episode drops next Wednesday. Join us then. Bye for now.